Imagine standing on a battlefield in the blistering heat of June 1778. The sun beats down like a hammer, and the air is thick with smoke and dust. Cannon fire roars in the distance. Amid this chaos, you spot a woman, dress soaked in sweat, hauling a heavy wooden bucket across the scorched field to a cannon crew too exhausted to shout. She's not supposed to be here, and yet she is. We call her mollypitcher. Now, that name probably rings a bell, maybe from a textbook or a school play, where she's charging toward a cannon after her husband falls, bravely taking his place. It's a thrilling image. But like many legends, the truth behind mollypitcher is layered, part fact, part folklore, and entirely human. Let's start with the real women behind the name. You see, mollypitcher wasn't a single person. It was more of a stand-in name, kind of like how G.I. Joe came to represent American soldiers. Back then, Molly was a common nickname for women named Mary, and pitcher referred to the water jugs they carried. These women weren't generals or politicians. They were wives, daughters, laundresses, and cook. Ordinary women thrown into extraordinary circumstances. One of the most likely inspirations for the mollypitcher story was Mary Ludwig Hays. She was born in Pennsylvania, married a man named William Hays, and when he enlisted in the Continental Army, she followed him to war, not as a soldier, but as a camp follower. That term, by the way, might sound dismissive today, but in the 18th century, it referred to women who supported the army by cooking, washing, mending, and yes, bringing water to the men in battle. Mary was said to be bold, practical, and tireless. According to legend, she delivered pitchers of water to exhausted men under fire. But more than that, she helped reload the cannon when her husband collapsed during the Battle of Monmouth. Can you picture it? Smoke thick as fog, the deafening percussion of gunfire, and there she is. A woman, sleeves rolled, skin sunburnt, stepping over bodies, picking up a ramrod. The Battle of Monmouth itself was brutal. June 28, 1778. Temperatures soared well past 100 degrees. Men died from heat stroke as often as they did from musket fire. General George Washington took personal command to hold the line. Soldiers fell in rows, not from wounds, but from the sun. Women like Mary weren't just offering moral support. They were hauling water, sponging out cannon barrels, running messages. There was a rhythm to battle that day. Boom, ram, boom, and somewhere in that noise, Mary's hands found the same beat. Whether she actually fired that cannon or not, the image stuck. It was a scene that captured people's imagination. A woman, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, standing at the mouth of war and saying, "I'm not backing down." But she wasn't alone. Margaret Corbin also stands out. Born in western Pennsylvania, Margaret lost her father in a Native American raid as a child. Her life was shaped by survival. When she followed her husband John into war, it wasn't to chase glory. It was because she had nowhere else to go. At the Battle of Fort Washington in 1776, her husband was killed in front of her. She didn't freeze. She didn't flee. She stepped into his place. She fired the cannon. She was hit by grape shot in the arm and chest. That injury never healed. Her arm was left useless. Still, she survived. Years later, Congress awarded her a pension. A rare gesture for a woman. But even then, she struggled. Wounded and impoverished, she was moved to the soldiers' garrison at West Point, not as an honored veteran, but more like a burden. Imagine living among reminders of the war, but never fully embraced by the peace that followed. There were countless others, women who never saw a battlefield, but bore the war just the same. Picture Lydia, a tavern keeper in New Jersey, passing notes to spies hidden in loaves of bread. Or Hannah, who nursed 6 different soldiers through smallpox only to lose her youngest child to the disease. And then there were the water bearers and camp followers. These women weren't celebrated. Often, they were looked down upon by officers and civilians alike. But without them, the army would have collapsed. They cooked meals, carried supplies, patched uniforms, and cared for the sick and dying. They brought humanity to the harshest conditions. They weren't saints. Some were survivors. Some were opportunists. Some were fiercely loyal. All of them were brave. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear their footsteps across the muddy fields of Valley Forge, carrying buckets, bandages, and burdens. So how do we separate fact from folklore? That's one of the hardest tasks in history. Documents were scarce, literacy was limited, most stories passed by word of mouth. Some exaggerations crept in, not to deceive, but to inspire. America needed stories of heroism. It needed people who stood tall. Mollypitcher was molded from that need. The image of a woman manning a cannon was dramatic, memorable, patriotic. She became part of the national story, taught to schoolchildren, painted on murals. But like all myths, hers began to shift over time. Details blurred, new versions appeared. Her story became a canvas onto which the country projected its ideals. And yet, the truth was always more complex and more powerful, because Mollypitcher became more than a person. She became a wartime symbol. She was resilience embodied. In the face of fear, hunger, and loss, she carried on. She didn't wear a uniform or command an army, but she stood her ground. She did what was needed. And that's something the war taught us over and over. The revolution was won not only by famous names, but by the many unnamed hands that steadied the cause. Even George Washington understood the importance of morale, of shared sacrifice. He was a leader under immense pressure, often outmanned, underfunded, and politically cornered. He couldn't have held the army together without the invisible labor of women like Mary and Margaret. As the war ended, the questions began. What would become of these women? What would the new nation do for them? The answer, sadly, was often, not much. The immediate aftermath of the revolution was messy. Veterans returned to shattered homes. Land grants were delayed, pensions were denied, inflation wrecked local economies. There were uprisings like Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, where veterans demanded debt relief and justice. The very men who had fought for freedom now found themselves imprisoned for unpaid taxes. And the women, they slipped back into obscurity. Mary Ludwig Hays returned to Pennsylvania. She was known in Carlisle as a bit rough around the edges, maybe drank too much, maybe spoke too loudly. But the townspeople remembered her cannon story, and when she died in 1832, they buried her with military honors. That was rare. Most women faded from view, but Mollypitcher didn't fade. She lingered. In textbooks, monuments, folklore. In 1905, New Jersey erected a statue in her honor. During the women's suffrage movement, she was invoked as proof that women had always contributed to the nation. World War II revived her again, this time as the namesake of programs honoring female military service. Her story has evolved, stretched, and reshaped over centuries, but its core remains. She is the American woman in wartime, overlooked, underestimated, indispensable. And so her legacy endures. It lives in the military women serving today, in single mothers juggling jobs and childcare, in teachers holding classrooms together under impossible circumstances, in anyone who's had to step up when others couldn't. Because Mollypitcher is not about the cannon. She's about courage, about persistence, about stepping forward when you're told to stand back. So next time you hear the name, don't just picture a heroic pose. Picture sweat and blood. Picture choices made without applause. Picture a woman who didn't wait for permission to do what had to be done. Because in the end, it's not the legends that matter most. It's the people behind them. The ones who carry water through gunfire, who lift the wounded, who hold the line when history forgets their names. And those are the people who built this country. Mollypitcher was one of them, and so were countless others whose stories remain untold. But they were there, and they always will be,